I told my 10-year-old son that I was coming here tonight. He said, "Oh, where are you going out to, Dad?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to the Quakers meeting house." And I said, "Do you know who they are?" And he said, "Well, I didn't know they were here in Portland, but Dad, you know they were the best abolitionists."
Oh, good.
So I'm honored to be here amongst the best abolitionists and the best anti-war fighters this country has ever had. Every war fought by the U.S. since World War II has been an imperial war. Imperial war, whereby more powerful societies exert their dominance over less powerful societies, who are then compelled to serve the interest of the imperial power, is arguably the oldest and most evil way that humans oppress and exploit one another. It's wrong, and it must be opposed for that reason. The first duty of every citizen is to do everything in his or her power to prevent the government who acts in his or her name from inflicting harm on other societies. This means that whatever the relationship between empire and the economy may prove to be, it has no policy implication for honorable citizens who must fight tooth and nail to force our governments to abandon imperial ambitions and embrace instead a foreign policy of peaceful cooperation. What is the relationship between imperial war and the economy? Well, the first thing to understand is that when the economy is functioning as it should, that is, when we are using our resources fully and efficiently, there's a strict trade-off between what economists have long called guns and butter. Every soldier sent to kill and occupy abroad is one less teacher who can educate children in our classrooms. It's that simple. There's a terrific website that helps anyone translate military expenditures into what domestic programs we could have had instead. It's www.nationalpriorities.org. For example, I calculated that with the taxes that residents of Multnomah County will pay annually, just for Obama's new war against ISIS, we could have had instead 90 more elementary school teachers to reduce class size and improve public education in Portland public schools. Now, sometimes capitalist economies do not live up to their potential. Sometimes there are lots of unemployed people and resources. In this case, it's no longer actually necessary for there to be a trade-off between guns and butter, since we could have more of either without giving up any of the other at all. The Great Depression was a time when, because the economy was operating so far below its potentials, we could have had more guns and butter. The New Deal, World War II, and today's Great Recession all demonstrate this truth. But what we want right now is a Green New Deal, not more military Keynesianism. We now have a triple crisis. We have an economic crisis that hasn't gone away, a banking system that's still every bit as dangerous as it was when the financial system crashed 5 years ago. We have an ecological crisis that's the greatest crisis humanity has ever faced. And the United States has a crisis of empire. We have an imperial crisis. The right solution is to cut, not expand military spending, and to launch a massive Green New Deal to prevent catastrophic climate change. We need to launch the greatest technological reboot in history, a massive transfer of productive resources to renewables and energy conservation. From where? From military spending, from luxury consumption for the 1%, from consumption of carbon-intensive goods to less carbon-intensive goods. And we need a dramatic change in how we enjoy our increases in productivity. We need to enjoy them as more leisure, not more useless consumption that no longer increases well-being. Now, there are a few subtleties in the relationship between the economy and war. There can be trade-offs between guns and butter even when there need not be, i.e. even when there are vast quantities of unemployed workers and resources. Because of the politics of budgetary logic in America, when the rich refuse to pay taxes, ordinary people sensibly refuse to take up the slack. Which means that governments operate under artificial and counterproductive revenue constraints even when economic conditions do not require these constraints. When governments engage in budgetary madness and refuse to increase spending during recessions, then more guns means less butter even when there are idle productive resources that could be used to produce more of both. Now here's a question that I think that the peace movement has to be careful to take seriously and addressed honestly. Do citizens of empires benefit materially? But empire is sometimes a negative-sum game where the costs outweigh the benefits for the imperial power even while the damage to subjugated economies is considerable. However, this is the important point. The important point is not whether or not the imperial power gains or loses as a whole. The important question is how the costs and benefits of empire are distributed among different social groups, because they are never distributed equally. More of the costs are invariably borne by disadvantaged sectors, while more of the benefits of empire are always accrue to internal elites of one kind or another. This means that even if there are net material benefits from empire, that the overwhelming majority of the populations of imperial powers are materially harmed and would be made materially better off if imperial policies were abandoned. This is clearly the case in the U.S. today, and there's important empirical work done by good economists who work on this issue that prove that to be the case. And there's a second website I would recommend to you. It's the website of Economists for Peace and Security. It's www.EPS, Economists for Peace and Security, EPSUSA.org. And you can go there and find studies cited that talk about who benefits and who does not benefit from U.S. imperial activities abroad. And the vast majority of us do not materially benefit, but actually are made worse off. Which is not the best reason for opposing war. But just in case. If it helps in a good cause, put it to use.
One of the underpinnings of all the war has to do with our oil addiction, which everybody in this room understands. But we haven't built that movement. And why haven't we built that movement? So imagine, if you will, just for a second, that space invaders came down from outer space. And these space invaders acidify our oceans, destroy our mountaintops, ruin the soil so it's no longer productive, clear-cut our forests. Imagine if they did that. We'd be up in arms. But somehow that hasn't happened, even though that's exactly what's going on. And as we think about it, and as we talk to people about this, one of the things that's real clear is that a history has been taken away from us, a history of social movements. I don't have to tell you folks this, but many groups that I talk to, that history is not in their minds. In my lifetime, there were huge parts of this country where there were separate drinking fountains for blacks and separate drinking fountains for whites. There were separate restaurants for blacks, separate restaurants for whites. That changed because people studied, they worked together, they mobilized, they created organizations, they marched, they sat in, they fought, and they won. And that history has been taken away from people. People don't remember it. Think about the women's movement. the history of this popular show Mad Men that describes the way women and men were in the 50s. I mean, my mom wore girdles. My mom had no sense of herself. It's true for most of my friends' moms. They had no sense of creating a world for themselves, or having jobs that would be fulfilling for themselves, or caring for their kids with their husbands. That changed because women did the same thing that the civil rights movement did. They organized, they studied, they marched, they sat in, they did what was necessary to make those changes. And that history's been taken away from us. I can't tell you how many talks I've given, and people just don't know this stuff. And that's what we've got to remind people of, that history. And we can make those kind of changes. Rosa Parks, to me, is the great epitome of this sort of lack of history. Rosa Parks, for most Americans, was this woman who sat down on a bus and she suddenly got this idea that everything had been wrong in her life, and so she stopped it. That's how 95% of Americans perceive Rosa Parks' history. Rosa Parks was trained at the Hahnel Institute. It was part of a clear plan by the NAACP to start a whole movement. That's why Rosa Parks was there. But 95% of the public has no knowledge of this. So we need to teach people this history and talk about this movement. Naomi Klein's got a new book out about climate, and there was an interview with her in Atlantic, and she talks about a piece that Ezra Klein had, who's sort of one of the leading liberal writers in the country, about how the climate movement wasn't going to happen. And what she talked about was the fact that he didn't believe in a social movement. He had no concept of social movement. This guy's in his early 30s. And so that was the reasons he was giving why it wasn't going to happen. Well, we can build it. We can make it happen. We can make a difference. I helped start up Portland Chapter 350 in the last year and a half. There are now 9 grassroots organizations around the state that have all popped up in the last year and a half that are mobilizing around climate. And if we can mobilize around climate, we're going to take away one of those underpinnings that is pushing these Middle Eastern wars. Because the other part of this going on in terms of the money machine is that the technology that a number of the speakers are talking about is starting to really impact the bottom line. And the money machine goes wherever it needs to make money. And if it can make more money on solar, it's going to go there. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on it. If we build the movement, we can make this happen. So I really encourage you folks. There's over 1 million Oregonians that are very concerned about climate. That's a base we can build on to build this movement. 2
very well-known companies in the States that both have factories outside the Green Line and so are illegal in essence are Ahava, the Dead Sea products, and SodaStream has been very big recently. There's a wonderful website that's called whoprofits.org that will give you lists and companies and links. There's also the BDS movement. I think it's .org or .com. .net. Okay.
The Portland City Council just recently decided to have a contract with G4S, which is a security company, to provide security for Union Station, City Hall, the Portland Building, and several other buildings that are owned by the Portland City Council. So Portland has a contract with G4S, which is a company that runs a lot of Israeli prisons, and in those prisons, torture is carried out, oftentimes by G4S contractors. Also, children are put in adult facilities and are not given access to their parents are not even told that they've been taken, and they're kept there for years. So the kind of horrific violations that go on in Israeli prisons are carried out a lot of times by G4S contractors. They also engage with ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and in Britain there is a lawsuit going against G4S for the strangling of an African immigrant who was being deported on a plane, and G4S agents tackled him and choked him to death. So that's the kind of company that we're talking about, that the city of Portland, the great progressive city council of the city of Portland has decided that this is the company that they want to contract for the security for our municipal buildings. It's not an Israeli company. It's British, and it is, but it has the contracts with the Israeli military in the prison system, and it is the largest security contractor in the U.S. So it is a huge, huge company. As far as the banks, I think that is a great idea. If you haven't taken your money out of banks, do so, because basically all of the big banks are complicit, and credit unions, local, go local, and also challenge this whole system of this kind of Wall Street casino economy that we have decided is how we are all going to run our country, or we haven't decided, but it's been decided for us that everyone has, if you want to have a retirement, if you want to have security in your old age, well, you have to get a 401k, and where does that money go? It goes all into Wall Street, and this is sold to people as the way to maintain security in your life. And this is how our economy is run. It's run by these parasites on Wall Street that are sucking up the wealth from everyone and investing it in killing people. So, enough.
I've been spending a bunch of time in the faith community, and there's an incredible amount of movement happening in the faith community, and the civil rights movement was a huge part of the huge success of the civil rights movement was also the faith community. I had a meeting yesterday with an evangelical minister, and there's incredible movement amongst young evangelicals around creation care. That's really going to change things. Coming back to this question of divestment, the state of Oregon has $15 billion. Let me repeat that: $15 billion invested in fossil fuels. Part of what and state of Washington has even more invested in fossil fuels. So this big battle over coal and oil, our money is financing the building of all these terminals up and down the West Coast. Sightline Institute had a great report on it this week. So part of this movement has got to be to get the state to pull the state of Oregon and the state of Washington to pull its money out of this stuff.
Some things are very simple, and one of the things that's very simple is that certainly over the past 20, 30 years, it's basically the Wall Street banks that dictate economic policy. That was getting clear. It's been true through the Republican Party for a long time, and it became very clear during the Clinton administration. It's become even more clear during the Obama administration. So the Wall Street banks are dictating economic policy. That's why they get bailed out. That's why the rest of us don't. It's that simple. So yes, you want to change economic policy so that it works for people and not the Wall Street banks. You got to beat them, and how you beat them, and and whether you take your money out and you put it in credit unions, et cetera. Yes. And really the same thing's true on climate change. The reason that nothing is happening with climate change is that for the past 150 years, the fossil fuel industry has been in charge of energy policy in the United States. And until you beat them, then we aren't going to, be able to get things done that are going to be effective in time to stop climate change. And again, so the idea that sometimes divestment and boycotts are the right strategy to hurt the enemy where in their pocketbook, sometimes that's effective, and we need to look at those things. So your idea about, well, can we boycott the banks, the bad banks? Yeah, we need to do that. Just like 350 Org, I think it's actually one of the most successful campaigns they've had, is in convincing universities to divest, from their portfolios from fossil fuel. And now we have the Rockefeller Foundation. What a wonderful, example. The oil industry par excellence, the Rockefeller Foundation has finally just made and they've got a very big portfolio that funds an awful lot of NGOs in this. They're going to
$50 billion yesterday
Right.
or something.
And ExxonMobil.
Yes, so they're going to divest from fossil fuel industries, and that does make a difference.
We need to be the leaders and make a choice in every moment that if you want to get someone, if you want to get yourself engaged, is to do the legwork or ask someone, if you don't know where to go to find that information. Engage in conversations that might be uncomfortable in different groups of people that you might roll in. You might roll in places and start conversations that you wouldn't, or make comments that you wouldn't, but that you believe in, because you don't want to make ripples. And I know how that is. I'll go hang out with my family, and sometimes I don't want to get into a fight about certain things, but more often than not, I feel more like that I'm doing the work that I believe in, and I'm being the person of integrity that I want to be by speaking from my heart and about those things that I believe need to be happening and change.
Let me give you some statistics. Actually, I watched the acceptance speech of the new president-elect in Afghanistan, and he's Western educated, and actually he went to the same university as my brother, the American University in Lebanon, Beirut. But he was very explicit that he will put women on the Supreme Court of the country, and that they will be represented in his cabinet, not just a token, but really based on the qualifications. And there are a lot of qualified women. As a matter of fact, in Afghanistan, until about 1992, that's when the socialist government collapsed, the university system had more women in it as students than men. So all those people who graduated from the university systems, up until 1992, they're aging, but they're still there, and they're becoming prominent. The parliament, for whatever it is, for what it is, really, 25% of the parliament in Afghanistan is women, and so that's a good sign. And culturally, that country actually, with the exception of the past few decades of war, it's things are progressing actually, and a lot of people, they have that nostalgia, and in terms of even equality, I think things will get better. It's just if they're left in peace. For me, I think what you can do is that in Afghanistan especially, the U.S. can do a lot of good actually. So it has to do with the accountability of the money that's going there, and just asking our government here, the representatives, in Congress, in the Senate, to just see how that money is spent, and then when the money is sent, that it's actually spent responsibly. But I think we have the ability, to really do a lot of good, and building education, that is key to what Afghanistan would look like in the next 5 to 10 years. So there is some hope there with the new president, and so stay tuned.
Now, the real question is, didn't we pass a Financial Reform Act, and didn't it solve the problems and make us safer? And the very quick and accurate answer is no and no. That it was a fig leaf. Wall Street basically wrote most of it and managed to get everything out that they really didn't want to have. Every regulation and restriction that we needed to put on them, they managed to get out.
Just like Obamacare.
Well, it was worse than Obamacare. In Obamacare, you can say maybe there's some good things in there. Maybe it could be a stepping stone. Maybe
Still single payer.
there's very little good you can say about the Financial Reform Act that was passed. Basically, Wall Street managed to crash the global economy and suffer no legislative consequences whatsoever. And that really is quite different than what happened in the 30s. In the 30s, there were legislative, and Glass-Steagall was the crowning glory of that. Pick your cause. There's more than enough to go around. Don't waste time arguing with somebody else who's picked a slightly different cause or is going about it in a slightly different way. And mostly learn to fight like Quaker abolitionists. They won and beat a more powerful enemy than we face today.
progressive have a habit, I can speak from long years of doing this, of talking to ourselves. I've spent a chunk of time, from a very secular background, I've spent a chunk of time in the last year in the faith community, made a whole bunch of new friends, a whole bunch of new contacts, a whole bunch of new ways of relating to people that have improved my life dramatically, and I hope build the movement. So I encourage you to think about places you don't usually go, organizations and institutions that you don't usually spend time with, and try and reach out to them and spend time with them, because that's how we're going to make change.
It really feels like this tipping point in public opinion is crucial. It feels like slowly you can start talking about Israel and talking about Zionism, and you're not automatically an anti-Semite. And I think I feel like that's very big in the States. I'm new and I haven't been to this country very long, but my feeling is that something with this holiness around Israel and the fact that nobody's allowed to criticize Israel ever. I feel like we're cracking that wall, and we're getting the truth out, and we're getting facts out of what is really happening, and it's a very very clear war of perceptions. When you have Israeli representative going on CNN and going on all the American news channels and saying Israel withdrew from Gaza, that's Israel lying to American citizens to your faces. That's Israel playing semantics in trying to affect the public opinion. Just mention it in your Friday dinners. Just talk about it with your friends and family. And even when it's inconvenient, and even when they look at you funny, just know truth, know facts, know what is really happening, and truth trumps perception in the end. So just stay with that.
If I have one last thought, it's the one thing that I will remember from this evening is from what Brother Ian said, and I'm a man of the cloth, so I'm going to clean it up. Figure it out, but effing do something. Thank you, and good night.